The thing with online content creators is they're always looking to achieve the lowest common denominator. Influencers, by chasing the algorithm of social media, they're already mechanomorphizing themselves. Influencers having chatgpt generated tweets or summaries of their podcasts. And what we're going to see is not creativity, but homogeneous forms of output, where you're going to start being able to see that someone is tweeting, but it looks suspiciously similar to these 1,000 other summaries of other podcast episodes. So the individuals who are going to win in the new age of creativity post-AI are the ones who maintain that degree of authentic human creativity, one that isn't instantly replicable. That's a hard word to say, and a word that an AI would struggle.
Yes, we can pivot like that, right? We humans can pivot like that. We can choose a different word if we are having...
Oh, we can make mistakes.
Yeah, we can make mistakes. That's the whole point.
As I glaringly did there, when a system is incapable of making a mistake, then we should be, deeply concerned.
Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari. I'm the community manager at the Thousand Faces Club, and you're welcome to the Fireside Chats. Our guest today is a Futures Theorist who hosts the Futures podcast, where he hosts scientists, technologists, artists, and philosophers who are working to imagine the sorts of developments that might dramatically alter what it means to be human. He has hosted documentaries for Futurism and has contributed to BBC Radio, BBC One, The Guardian, Discovery Channel, Vice, Motherboard and Wired Magazine. He's none other than LukeRobertMason. Welcome to the Thousand Faces Club, Luke.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, really thrilled to have you. I mean, the buzzword is chatgpt, so let's begin there. What three words come to your mind when you hear the word chatgpt?
Terrifyingly accurate system? That's an interesting question.
So where do you see it going? Because, ChatGPT 4 is already here, making waves. People are adding prompts. They're selling prompts. Businesses are being built around it. So a quick outlook that you may have on it.
Yeah, the one thing with ChatGPT that I don't see is it going away. So ChatGPT is here and ChatGPT is staying. What it turns into, I think, is what's going to be really interesting, especially over the next couple of years. A lot of people are worrying that it's going to get rid of so many people's jobs, that the creative industry is going to be destroyed by these AI tools. But the way in which to think about them is to how can we, I guess, use them as collaborators, co-conspirators in many ways. ChatGPT, I mean, it still has its problems, its glaring problems in some cases. So I don't think they're going to be as good as human beings at having honest and interesting conversations. And I think that thing around being interesting is something that ChatGPT can't do yet. In fact, if anything, it's installed into its design that it's not allowed to be interesting. ChatGPT has to be familiar. It has to be recognizable. But the one thing it can't be is creative, interesting, or completely offhand.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that you say it can't be creative, because we are seeing, these image rendering tools, these video rendering tools. People are, they're scared for their future, their jobs. So as a theorist yourself, how do you theorize this? Like, at what point it will become that creative that it can, replace people at jobs? Do you think that happening with other AI tools as well?
Well, I think the thing we need to look at is that word creative. So do we really devalue creativity so much that the sorts of things that AI tools are creating are something that we see as creativity? I mean, surely human creativity, there's something ineffable about that, something that these systems don't quite achieve, because we're always looking at trying to work out how is it that it's created this thing that is familiar to me and yet at the same time is frighteningly alien. I don't think these tools are creative. They're potentially collaborative and they have the ability to generate things, but in terms of creating creativity, that's a really high ask of an AI system. So I would say yes, generative, but creative, not so much.
You're right. We should definitely differentiate between, generative versus creative. That's a really important distinction. So speaking of, creations, creators are there on internet. How do you see the relationship between content creators and their followers changing because of these AI tools?
I think we're going to get to a point at which The thing with online content creators is they're always looking to achieve the lowest common denominator. In many ways, human online influencers have roboticized themselves. They've mechanomorphized themselves. So this idea of anthropomorphism is where we attribute, say, human or animal characteristics to objects, but mechanomorphism is where we attribute robotic attributes to human beings. And influencers, by chasing the algorithm of social media, they're already mechanomorphizing themselves. And these tools are ideally designed to produce the sorts of things that the algorithm wants to see. So what you're going to have is influencers having chatgpt generated tweets or summaries of their podcasts, or explanations of what they're doing in certain videos, or maybe coming up with certain ideas. And what we're going to see is not creativity, but homogeneity. Homogeneous forms of output, where you're going to start being able to see that someone is tweeting, yes, maybe a summary of their podcast episode, but it looks suspiciously similar to these 1,000 other summaries of other podcast episodes, because of maybe the way in which the grammar or the words have been arranged. Because that's really all that ChatGPT is doing. It's taking words and predicting what word needs to come next. So the individuals who are going to win in the new age of creativity post AI are the ones who maintain that degree of authentic human creativity, who are able to create a unique contribution, one that isn't instantly replicable. That's a hard word to say, and a word that an AI would struggle to type or say, maybe. Instantly replicable. I'll forget it. Instantly reproducible, let's say, to use the idea of age mechanical reproduction.
We can pivot like that, right? We humans can pivot like that. We can choose a different word if we are having.
Oh, we can make mistakes.
Yeah, we can make mistakes. That's the whole point.
As I glaringly did there. When a system is incapable of making a mistake, then we should be.
Ooh, that's dangerous.
We should be deeply concerned, because the one thing, when I first saw ChatGPT, the thing that it reminded me of was a British science fiction author called Douglas Adams, who wrote this book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it was a tongue-in-cheek sort of explanation of what happens when a spacefaring species comes in contact with humanity. But as part of that story, he had an AI, this supercomputer. It was called, interestingly, it was called Deep Thought. And individuals wanted to know the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And they go to this supercomputer that's been developing an answer to this question for thousands and thousands of years, and they ask the question. And the supercomputer comes back with the answer 42. And they go, well, you've been running this question around in your system for thousands of years, and the answer's 42. And Deep Thought comes back to the individuals who've just asked the question and goes, well, maybe you need to know what question you should ask. And that kind of feels like how we're dealing with ChatGPT. There is a cottage industry, not in the outputs you get from ChatGPT, but in the sorts of questions you should ask ChatGPT. And ChatGPT isn't able to give you an answer that isn't familiar to you. It's not allowed to make a mistake. And from those mistakes, you see new forms of creativity. ChatGPT has to be right. It has to be familiar. It will never answer 42 to that question, unless of course it's referencing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I wonder what ChatGPT would come up with next. But certainly, there are some excuse me, there are some really interesting things happening. Like on March 14th, Steven Pinker released a digital collectible of his famous idea that free speech is fundamental. So these collectibles will guarantee, recurrent access to intimate group calls with him for several years. So clearly technology is providing interesting ways of interaction, as well as the idea of ownership. And I'm really interested in this idea of ownership because NFTs are here. So do you really think that ideas could be owned or licensed like that in the future? Because it goes against the grain of technology, because technology is seen as some kind of a leveler who brings everyone to the same platform. But can you really own ideas?
Yeah, the only thing that Steven Pinker has proved is that free speech isn't free, and it actually has an Ethereum value associated with it. When I saw that project, I wasn't horrified, but I found it funny. I found it very silly. Clearly, someone in the Bitcoin and Ethereum community has sat Steven Pinker down and told him this is a great way to make a quick bit of cash. Ideas can't be owned. I mean, Steven Pinker's best friend, Richard Dawkins, he would tell him that ideas only travel as memes. Good ideas get their own, I guess, velocity.
Yeah.
And they spread on their own. They don't need to be. They don't need to be put on the blockchain because the blockchain. I mean, it's not a distribution platform. It's an ownership platform. If we spent all our time owning our ideas, humanity and individuals would not progress. If
Yep.
anything, give your good ideas away. And if someone wants to create a business or an NFT out of that idea, oh, so let them be it. But the good ideas are the ones that travel far. And the only way by allowing them to travel far is making them free and keeping them as something that is collectively owned by humanity. I mean, we can get into the philosophy of thought if you really want, but
Yeah.
the
Let's do
Steven
that.
Pinker thing is the Steven Pinker thing is just plain stupid.
Yeah, that's how you summarize something like that. And I mean, we are all aware of, ideas are, the things that connect all of us, right? So, but, do you think technology can also become self-aware of that level at any point? Do you see that? Because that's the main selling point of, AI, like it can take over the humanity, like once it becomes self-aware.
Yeah, I mean, this is a subject matter I spend a lot of time in. I'm currently doing my PhD looking at the public perception of humanoid robots and whether we can see whether a non-human agent like a robot might have something called awareness. But I'm sure there's so many people in the audience who know human beings in their life that they don't feel are very self-aware. So it's a very hard thing to prove, partly because, I mean, Shabam, I can't even prove that you are self-aware, and you can't
Interesting.
prove that I'm
Yeah,
self-conscious in any way,
great.
shape, or form. We assume through relationship, this relational situation that we're having, that you're a person, I'm a person, and that we both have some form of consciousness that's allowing us to interface. That relational moment is the only thing that we can prove. So if we can have a meaningful relational moment with a robot, is that the point at which we might be able to consider it to be self-aware? And does it require us to recognize it, to recognize the robot, for it to be to be an entity that has, I guess, agency?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of, the technological advances that are happening at such a rapid pace now, is there anything timeless about technology?
Timeless about technology. That's an interesting. What do you mean by timeless? Do you mind me turning that question back on you just very quickly?
Well, something that we may see, which is constant, let's say even after 100 years, something that is not going to change, something like, let's get to the philosophy of technology, if
Hmm.
you'd like me to make it more complicated.
Well, the etymology of technology is techneology. So techne is knowledge, and body of knowledge is what technology truly means. That's the etymology of the word. So technology, we've so quickly come to think of technology just as tools, just as devices. But
Mm.
really, technology is the way in which we encapsulate, communicate, and extend different forms of human knowledge. And we've done that in multiple formats and multiple mediums. The technology that we have today is just one. The challenge with technology is often used as a metaphor. It's often used as a metaphor to help us explain who we are as human beings. And when the metaphor becomes actualized, that's when technology is dangerous. Now, let me explain that a little bit better, and perhaps with
Yeah.
an example. So, for example, we used to think about the human brain as a machine, like a factory machine. We used to talk about thinking as cogs turning. Now we use the metaphor of computer technology. So we think about maybe I'm processing what you're saying. I'm downloading that thought. We use the most advanced technology that we have to help us understand ourselves, but that doesn't mean we are a computer. I assume you're not a computer, but in this day and
I
age,
can assure you, yeah.
we cannot be so sure. This is like the New York Times cartoon. I assume you're on the internet. Nobody knows you're a dog, but I assume you're not a computer. But it's in those moments where we forget that we look at technology, or we use certain technologies as ways to which they can explain who we are, and we take that as actual. So the brain isn't a computer, it's something slightly different, but we can use the metaphor of the computer as a useful device to help us understand things like thinking.
Wow, there is so much to unpack from that answer, but I'll leave that job to our viewers. So, how has being the man of science changed your relationship with your instincts?
Mm.
Do you still believe in your gut feelings? If yes, I'm assuming, I hope you say yes. Then why?
Leading the witness there. It's so funny, a man of science. I'm pretty agnostic. I'm pretty agnostic with regards to what I believe. There's a wonderful individual who everybody in this audience should read called Robert Anton Wilson, who used to have this great phrase, I
Yeah.
don't believe in anything, but I've got my suspicions. So I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to different forms of knowledge. Scientific knowledge is one way to know the world, but of course, intuitive knowledge is another way to own the world. And know the world. That's a problematic Freudian
You
slip.
have some plans
Is
there.
another way to do it. It's another way. Science is the way to own the world. Intuition is the way to know the world. There we go. So holding both of those is very important. And some people get so fixed and fixated on knowing the world in just one way through rationalism or scientism. But sometimes it's fun to play in those fuzzy spaces where you can think about things like magic or intuition or manifestation or whatever else you want to indulge with. Those are play spaces. All of the options are on the table if you choose and allow them to be.
Right. If we continue this question, which human value do you think AI would replace or replenish?
Which human value?
I'm throwing so many curveballs at you.
I think it's less about which value it's going to replace
Mhm.
and more about how will AI devalue what it means to be human in the 21st century. So that's really the
Oh,
question we have
okay.
to ask when we're
Yeah.
thinking about AI. It's like, what is the value add of being a human being in the 21st century if AI can do more and more of the things that we as human beings place usually monetary value on? So with things like ChatGTP, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, the minute we see ChatGTP creating blog posts or long pieces of copy, we think about the lack of jobs, creative individuals who will no longer have a job. And it's like, well, if the only thing we value is the creation of certain output for the purpose of selling stuff or gaining money, then surely we should just let things like ChatGTP go ahead and do those sorts of things, and human beings could find something else more fulfilling to do. So if anything, these AI tools, they devalue rather than replace the value of certain human beings.
Amazing. Very interesting. You're a futures theorist. How to annoy a futures theorist with a single question?
What do you think's gonna happen in the next 10 years?
What do you think's gonna happen in the next 10 years?
I do love that question. My mentor is a gentleman called Douglas Rushkoff, who's a media theorist who famously said that futurists suck. And the reason he thinks futurists suck is that often they make predictions based on the data they have today, and they do it unemotionally. And Rushkoff encouraged me to be a propagandist. Think about the sort
Oh,
of future that you want to see, and then espouse and promote the sorts of things that will make that future come to pass. In other words, have a little bit of agency over the future that you want, and also be responsible for the future that you might be creating.
so what kind of future do you want to see?
What sort of one in which that's the other annoying question that people ask futurists. What is the sort of future I want to see? One in which we can live quite comfortably, happily, and without distress in ambiguity. Now, there's a wonderful thing about knowing what something's going to be or how something's going to come to pass, but there's a true value in being okay with the fact that some things don't happen as you expected, and there may be challenges along the way. and living with that ambiguity and not knowing all the answers and working to discover those things. That's the sort of future that I want us to build for ourselves, because so many people want to just know what's coming next, and that creates so much anxiety about the future. You don't have to be scared about it if you can just breathe
Yeah.
and live in that ambiguous space of multitudes of possibilities.
Yep. Breathe. That makes you human. So, I mean, that's really important.
I mean,
Uh,
if you stop breathing, you wouldn't be around for much longer.
Absolutely. And speaking of what's coming next, are there any scientific projects that you're really excited about?
That's a great question as well. I mean, the thing that really excites me is things like space colonization. And I know that the word colonization is quite a
Yeah.
contested word to use
Loaded
when you
word.
talk about
Yep.
space. It's a loaded word when you talk about space in this day and age. The thing that I adore about the desire to go to space is not the commercial opportunity, it's the possibility of pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So one of the best books I read last year was Christopher Mason's The Next 500 Years. And he was a geneticist who worked with Scott Kelly. Scott Kelly famously was the astronaut who spent, I think it was
Yep.
365 days on the International Space Station. And then he came back to Earth. And luckily he had a twin. And they were able to compare the biology of those two individuals, one who'd been in space for an extended period of time and one that had been on planet Earth. And they saw that, Scott was a biological mess in many ways. So he came back and his clothes were burning his skin because he'd been in zero gravity for 365 days. He'd never felt clothes against his skin because there was no gravity. So the minute he was back on Earth, his clothes hurt him. Luckily the human body, after about 7
Yep.
days, he reclimatized
Yeah.
for Earth. But it just shows us, I mean, it shows us that, how bipedal breathing human bodies aren't fit for those extraterrestrial environments. So maybe it's worth preserving something here on Earth. Maybe our exploration of space is going to make us realize, in actual fact, why the hell would we want to leave here in the first place if it's so difficult out there? The great thing about exploring out there is the scientific value of new forms of knowledge that are in spaces, no pun intended, that are so alien to our own. So we're going to learn a lot. And in fact, we already have learned a lot. NASA produces these fantastic reports once a year where they basically justify the tax spending on NASA, but they're looking at all of the different innovations that they've created for space and how they've been applied to terrestrial life here on Earth. So we're learning a lot by doing what feels like the impossible. And if we're ever going to have a good argument for genetically modifying or enhancing human beings, it's going to
Right.
be for the purpose of going to space. You are going to have to dramatically alter human biology to allow people to live on Mars. The Scott Kelly example is important because it's going to take up to 50 days plus to get to Mars. And by the time you are at Mars, you're in 30% gravity. Now, you've been in zero gravity for 50 days. You're about to go to 30% gravity. What effects does that have on the human body? And that process, the science that needs to be done, will teach us so much about who we are as human beings. And we need those sorts of projects.
Absolutely. That's just amazing. And I was coming to the books. Can you also tell us about some of your other favorite books, like top three you can give us?
My favorite book, which I have a pile of in the corner, is some 40 Tales from the Afterlives by David Eagleman. Now, David Eagleman is a
Interesting.
neuroscientist, but he wrote this beautiful collection of short stories, of short science fiction stories that are all exploring what may or may not happen to us after we die. And the great thing about David is he has such a strong sense of humor. He's such a wonderful science communicator. But more importantly, is that he understands the power of science fiction to really communicate ideas, to make possibilities visceral and tangible to human beings. So this is one of my favorite books. I've got a pile of 5 in the corner there, and I gift them out at every chance that I get.
Wow, wonderful. And your favorite films? And don't say Martian, please.
Oh, I can't say The Martian, but I can't wait to grow potatoes from my
Potatoes.
own poop. No, my favorite film. I mean, that's the trickiest question you could have asked someone. What is my, one film that I really enjoyed, which was kind of the same sort of vibe as things like Black Mirror,
Mhm.
was a Spanish film, a Malvador film called The Skin I Live In. It's with Antonio Banderas, and it's a fascinating. I'm not going to spoil the ending for people, but it's a
Yeah.
fascinating film, really about human enhancement and human identity. And I think it's maybe 20, 25 years old now, but many of the themes that come up in that, I guess, sci-fi thriller movie are issues that we're dealing with today, especially around again, I'm trying not to give away the ending, but the way in which we modify human biology, how will that fundamentally change our identity? The other beautiful thing about the film, purely from an aesthetic standpoint, is how it kind of gives the twist away in the editing and the composition and certain things that are said. So it's one of those films. The reason it's my favorite film is one of those films you have to watch multiple times, and the more
Wow.
you watch it, the more you get from it.
Yeah, I mean, we all love the Blade Runners of the world. So yeah, we're looking forward to more and more science fiction, both in books and films, any other art forms. Last ritual we make our guests go through, Luke. Anybody you'd like to nominate for our show?
I mean, I highly recommend Christopher Mason. I mean it with no apology. It was one of my favorite books that I read last year. I thought the way in which he laid out the challenge of space and then the argument for pushing the boundaries of science for that purpose is truly fascinating. And he's not looking at space as a commercial activity so far as he's looking at it as a potentiality to learn something about human beings and human biology.
Absolutely. Luke Robert Mason, thank you so much for your time, giving us all your insights, your predictions, your pet peeves, and the books and the movies. I mean, we all love what you're doing with your podcast and your love with science. Your Twitter is amazing. We highly recommend people to follow Luke. And thanks to our audience for sticking with us. We do a lot of interesting stuff. Please check out our YouTube channel as well as our Instagram channel, Instagram page, and we'll be seeing you in the next episodes. Thank you.
Thank you.
And cut. That's it for today's episode, guys. If you really liked it, please subscribe to the Thousand Faces Club and press the bell icon below so that you don't miss any videos from us. Thank you.